Good morning, good Yontif. I work on my sermons for a long time. I really start pretty much right after break fast. Well, I start with anxiety and then the topic, and then about 8 months in, I throw it away and I start something else. But I have been working on this for quite a long time. And what I normally try to do with my sermons today is to have them a bit more not conversational, because you don't get to say anything about it to my face, but little more informal. But this has been a really emotional and challenging time, both in the world, but personally as well. It was a long summer, as some of you may know. And I wrote out a bit more than I normally do. So you'll forgive me if I read maybe a little more of this than I normally say, but it's really coming from it having been such an emotional time. And I know I think if you're sitting here, you've had a couple years, if not more so. Whenever I officiate at a funeral, and I have officiated at a lot of funerals, there's always at least one person, usually more, and they always ask me the same question. How old were they? I have not had a funeral where someone didn't come up to me and say, how old was the person? And it seems to be that if the person was a certain age when they passed away, it's like, oh, okay. And if they were below whatever that age was, then that was obviously much more traumatic, and it should take longer to get over. There seems to be this judgment that we have over how long someone should take to get over a loss. And I think that's not really a great way to think about things. And sometimes it's something we put on ourselves. People ask me, when are they going to experience closure? I hear that word a lot. When is there going to be closure? And the answer is never. There will never be that point where there is closure. Closure is wanting the hurt to stop. It's about missing the person so much, but wanting everything just to get back to normal. We want closure for those we love because we miss them so much it hurts. And we want closure for those we didn't love because we want those memories to go away. We ask, when are we going to get over this? And we're not. We're not going to get over it, but we can maybe find a way to deal with it, a way to get through it. There is no one who fully understands our loss or our pain. And sometimes what makes things worse are the people who think they do know our pain, and they judge us on it, often behind our backs. No one knows our story. No one knows our pain. We may not even understand it in this moment because we don't want to confront it because it just hurts so much. But Brene Brown says that owning our story can be hard, but not nearly as difficult as spending our lives running from it. Embracing our vulnerabilities is risky, but not nearly as dangerous as giving up on love and belonging and joy. Only when we are brave enough to explore the darkness will we discover the infinite power of our light. I think this is so much of what Jewish tradition is trying to do, is recognizing so many of us have experienced darkness, but that the light is there. I think that's one of the reasons behind saying Kaddish. Kaddish is letting you know that if you are saying Kaddish for whatever reason, whether it's Shiva or Shloshim, you're in mourning, or if it's for a Yortzeit, in that moment in your life, you are not okay. And you don't need to pretend you're okay. And you don't need to ask yourself, why aren't I okay? Kaddish says that in this moment, we recognize that the world is not the way it is supposed to be. And you're allowed to have those feelings. And if you run from those feelings, they're going to eventually catch up. COVID really made everything so difficult when it came to mourning. Over these last few years, there were smaller funeral services, limited shivas. It was very difficult. Every aspect of this was hard. So a lot of people have feelings that are unresolved, loose ends that feel like they were never tied up. But it wasn't just COVID, it's always the case. There are always going to be feelings that are never fully resolved. Even if the person lived a good long life, we would have liked one more day for them. And if the person was difficult and there's no way of fixing it, that's a kind of pain as well. But in Judaism, we don't have closings, we don't have endings, we just have new beginnings, we have reopenings. If you think with the Torah, on Simchat Torah, we end the Torah reading and we begin it the same day. The Talmud begins on letter Bet, and we always say Hadran, we will return to it. Our prayers are Poteach et Yodacha, to open our hands. Hu yiftach libenu, that God will open our hearts. Even Ne'ilah, which we have tonight, isn't a closing. The gates of heaven are never closed. Ne'ilah is about a sense of urgency, of don't wait to live your life. Don't wait to try to make things better. The gates of heaven never, ever close. The question is whether our hearts are closing. Everything in Judaism is about staying open. That's why we bring the community together during all kinds of life cycle events, because every single life cycle event is a moment of instability and transition. These life cycle events are really gateways into another part of our lives. They aren't endpoints. And we do not choose whether we go through these changes in life. We only choose how we go through them. We understand that there are always changes, and we know that, a wedding, a happy thing brings a change into a new kind of life. We know that that's an opening into something. But we don't really realize that when we have a loss, that's a potential for opening as well. It's a potential for looking within ourselves to really look what matters. And this is a really, really hard thing to do sometimes. In fact, I would say it's hard every time, but for different ways. I want to spend a moment talking about what I think is the difference between mourning and grieving. And this is just how I use the words and how I think about it. Mourning is the things you do about a loss. It's saying Kaddish, it's arranging the funeral, it's sitting Shiva. That to me is what mourning is. It's the expression. But grief is the feeling, is the sense of loss. And sometimes what makes it hard is that the person we are mourning, we do not grieve. We might grieve the relationship that was. If a person has been loving, we can grieve their life. But if a person has been harmful, we might mourn them, but grieving becomes complicated. Maybe you love them, maybe you don't. Maybe you have reconciled some of your feelings. So I think what's important is we look at these issues, we understand that our tradition gives us the space to not only express our feelings, but to think about what they are as well, and to give ourselves permission to feel whatever it is we're feeling. The laws of mourning do not mandate our emotions. They give us things to do. that give some shape to our life, that give some stability in the midst of the most chaotic moments. Our tradition really gives us these tools to mourn. The funeral service, the Shiva, we call it sitting Shiva for a reason. When we sit, it's about really encountering what's happening. It's sitting with the emotion. When we pray standing up, we pray for things to change. Prayer sitting down is where we accept the world as it is. It doesn't mean that we like it. It doesn't mean that it's what we want. But we surround people at the Shiva to help them sit through these very difficult times. In Kaddish, Yizkor, we come back to say these things can't be resolved. And don't put your pressure on yourself to fix them or resolve them. We wouldn't have Yortzeit if in 1 year all the feelings would go away. We wouldn't have Yizkor if it was all better. Our tradition understands that there's no ending, there's no closure on the feelings, whatever there are. But if we get together as a community, we can make it better. We can find a way to fix it with each other in a way that we can just get through our day. One of my favorite musicians is Lou Reed from the Velvet Underground. Any of you familiar with Lou Reed? He's a nice Jewish boy from Long Island. His name's Alan. And he wrote one of the most profound albums I've ever heard about loss. It's called Magic and Loss. And these are some of the words, and I think that they have a lot to teach about confronting loss. He says, when you pass through the fire, you pass through humble, you pass through a maze of self-doubt. You pass through arrogance, you pass through hurt, you pass through an ever-present past, pass through the fire to the light. When you pass through anger and self-deprecation and have the strength to acknowledge it all, when the past makes you laugh and you can savor the magic that let you survive your own war, you find that fire is passion and there's a door up ahead, not a wall. There's a bit of magic in everything, and then some loss to even things out. I think that's one of the most profoundly Jewish approaches I've heard to the issue of loss, that how do you survive your own war? How do you realize that there are doors you can go through even when you feel that they are walls? I want to share briefly a grammar lesson on how to think about dealing with loss in a better way. Any of you know what the word the subjunctive in grammar, how the subjunctive, I don't want to bring back any nightmares from English class, or maybe Schoolhouse Rock. I think they dealt with the subjunctive. An example of a subjunctive is, I wish it were Friday already. Right? I wish it were not so. The subjunctive expresses a wish, a desire, or a hope. It expresses uncertainty. And there's a wonderful writer, Jean Chen Ho, who talks about when she was learning English after coming from China, she learned about the subjunctive, and she said that rather than seeking closure, the subjunctive animates an abundance of questions to which we may never know definitive answers. A subjunctive mode of inquiry uses narrative to tell an impossible story and the impossibility of its telling. But to live in the subjunctive is a manner of seeing the past not as a fixed story, but one that the present constantly acts upon. The present is what determines the past, not the other way around. So I like this idea of we come together for Yizkor to reevaluate our past, to think about what those losses mean now, not what the losses meant when we are younger. Some of you are going to be saying Yizkor for someone who passed away many decades ago. And some of you are going to be saying Yizkor for someone who passed away days ago. And some of you, it might be both. You may have experienced a profound loss as a child and yet again as an adult. And there are a lot of feelings that are going on, a lot of confusions, and it's okay to feel that sense of tension, that sense of confusion, but it's not necessarily going to go away. It's going to change, but if we pay some attention to it, it can change in a way that opens us up instead of closing us down. And I want to share a teaching from Norman Fisher, who is a great spiritual teacher. And his best friend was Rabbi Alan Liu, who I was in rabbinical school with. Rabbi Liu was just the best of us, the smartest, most connected, kindest. And they were best friends. Rabbi Liu wrote a book on the high holidays called "This is Real and You Are Not Prepared." Maybe the best book about the high holidays that I read. So Rabbi Liu died very suddenly in 2009, 65 years old. He was actually jogging. He was on a rabbinical retreat. And Norman Fisher wrote a very beautiful passage about Alan, which I think connects to how you can stay open during losses. So he said, when Alan died, all of a sudden it was hard to take. I'm guessing that I will not get over it, that his death probably holds a permanent place of sadness in me, but I'm not so sure that I want to get over it. The sadness is okay. When someone you love is gone, that person can't do anything anymore. This means that you have to do something, or that you have to do something differently. Somehow you, who are connected to that person, have to do what they can no longer do. You have to ask yourself, now that this has happened, what will I do? What will I do in place of my friend? There is always something to be done. This was Alan's last teaching to me. I want to feel more, care more, do something more. That's my commitment. His death made me want to care more for other people. I have far to go, but I think of Alan and I keep working at it. And he continues, the other thing I learned is that love will naturally rush into the vacuum that loss creates. Even though we had been close before, the vacuum caused by the loss created much more love. Love creates love. That feeling wasn't something that came and went in a month or two, but with loss, difficulty, and the total overturning of the plan you had for your life comes more love and more depth if you turn in that direction. We need to learn how to turn toward our loss, to take it in, to find the meaning in it, and let it open for us a path to new life. That's a very hard thing to do. It is a very hard thing to stare at our losses and to sit with them and to ask ourselves, what does it mean? Because the loss can be overwhelming. And there are a lot of losses. There is the loss of what you love doing with the person, the love you had being with the person, and there's the loss of what it could have been, the loss of what never happened and never will happen. And if you have a family that is warm and loving and connected, and you experience a loss and the pain comes from that loss is real and it is profound, and you don't have to say, I'm glad we had them as long as we did and it's okay, if that's not what you're feeling. If you're feeling angry that I would really just have liked another day, that's okay as well. And if you have a loss of things that you wish had happened, or I can tell you what is even more terrible, wish had never happened. You're allowed to be kind to yourself for feeling angry. You're allowed to be kind to yourself for feeling sad. You don't have to make the best of everything. You can only be yourself in that moment and allow yourself, because otherwise you develop shame. Why am I feeling this way? Or, whatever happened wasn't really that bad. You don't have to make excuses for those who hurt you. You don't have to feel shame. You can instead spend your time thinking about the people who have loved you and have supported you, who do deserve your energy, your thoughts, and your memories. There's a very powerful article I read by Marnie Crawford Samuelson. It's called Welcoming the Life That Is Yours. It says, we grieve for soulmates, for persons or people we have held tight, for neighbors and colleagues, for people behind the numbers and charts. We grieve places that we love that are disappearing or being harmed beyond recognition. But may I welcome the life that is mine and mine alone. There is no end run, no end point to grieving, and yet perhaps you can begin to imagine a moment when grief lifts just enough so that you sense something changing. You don't have to succumb to despair. Even though you would not have chosen all of the life that you have, you can feel a sense of purpose. You can feel more at home. You can feel stronger. What if we were to pause and allow grief to wash over us and change us and let ourselves open and be fully here in the only life that's ours to live? Imagine offering yourself great kindness and compassion. Imagine reaching out to other people and feeling fragile new connections. You don't have to leave behind the ones you love, miss, and grieve. You do go on. How will you spend your precious life, this moment, these 24 hours? And she concludes with something that I meditate on a pretty regular basis. These are 3 phrases. May I find the courage to bear my sorrow. May I hold reasonable hope. And may I welcome the life that is mine and mine alone. We say Psalm 27 every day from the beginning of Elul through Sukkot. And it has a couple of very powerful lines that have really resonated with me. One is, Ki avi ve'imi azavuni va'adonai ya'asfeni, that even though my mother and my father have left me, God will help put me back together. And there are lots of ways that people leave. People leave through their passing away. People leave through dementia. People leave through abandonment. But each leaving is difficult, and it may not have been the fault of the person at all, but it's still a kind of leaving. But Adonai Ya'asfeni, that the infinite compassionate one will gather us back together, not fix us, not bring us back to the way we were before, but will help us get it together enough to go on in a way that allows us to pursue meaning and joy. My friend, Reverend Mimi Biedron, who I talk to every week, she has a wonderful way of thinking about people who have passed away, whether they were easy or challenging. She says, may their energy go to a good place. May their energy do good in the world. And I have found that extremely helpful. We end that psalm with Chazak v'ametz libecha, that we should strengthen our hearts and have courage. We need to find a way to strengthen our hearts, but not to harden it, to keep opening and reopening our hearts, to not shut down because of grief, to not shut down because of anger or loss, but to find new ways to connect, to find new doors to walk through. It isn't easy, it isn't without pain, but it will give us the capacity for endless meaning, comfort, and joy. Shana Tova.